Thanks for having me on, by the way. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for
Oh,
saying
my pleasure.
yes.
Easy, not a problem.
Can we start off by you telling us about your family setup?
Yeah. So do you mean like the configuration of the kids in okay, yep. So I'm I'm married. I met my wife when my son was 2 years old. So I had my first child just after turning 20, and I'm 41 now. So he's 21, my oldest. Sort of did the shared parent thing. His mum and I separated when he was when I think he was 4 months old, and it was a mutual separation. We were just young and just realised that we worked better apart than together, and so we shared him sort of half the week each. And then I met my wife when he was two, and so her and I have been together for 18 years. We had our daughter 13 years ago, and then we had my youngest Maximus 2 years ago. So that's the sort of thing, 21, 13, and 2. And I was just saying to my wife last night, I was like, man, I feel like we've been dealing with shitty diapers for so long. And I'm so over it. Like, it's kind of like having kids so far apart. There's a massive benefit to it because each kid kind of gets raised as an only child. And so they get a lot of attention. And my oldest, Ashton, was so good to my young daughter, even though the age was like 10 or so years apart. They got on incredibly well, and he really took the big brother thing seriously. And same with my daughter to Max. But so there's these benefits, and you've got a bit of room to breathe where you can do your life and all of that. But I'm just sick of doing nappies, eh? I was changing them last night, and I was like, oh man, when's it going to end? Well, it has ended
Soon.
because we're certainly not doing it again. That's for sure.
Surely the end is really soon in terms of nappies or diapers,
Yeah,
right?
it is. It's just like
Yes,
when you're doing it and you're just like, man, 21 years of this shit, literally.
literally.
Yeah, yeah,
So you came a dad at 20. Can
yeah.
you take us back to that moment and what that looked like for you in terms of, I mean, your career at that time and what you were doing? What was life like?
Yeah, man, it's so interesting doing a podcast where this is sort of more the focus because I tend to talk about this stuff a little bit more peripherally in podcasts that I've done or even just in general. And whereas I think these things, and I know you girls think the same because I've listened to a few of your episodes, need a little bit more attention. And yeah, well, I mean, I was 19 when I found out I was going to have him. When I found out I was going to be a dad, I was seeing him on the screen at 15 weeks and 6 days. So 2 arms, 2 legs, fully formed. That's when I found out I was like, literally, I am going to be a dad. And me and his mum were like, wow, okay, all right. And at the time, I was, I was a classic sort of young creative, and I was definitely having a lot of fun at the time. I was in a prog band of original music. I had started a Tool tribute band, and that was just a great outlet as well. I was just enjoying being late teens, and I would say I developed relatively quick on the drums. So enjoying the benefits of having a developed skill in the creative space as a drummer, and the opportunities that come with that, I suppose. And I mean, my prog band and I we were going to take on the world, And then when I found out about when I found out about Ashton, what happened in that moment was the doctor said, and I'll just be honest, he said, look, they just lay it all out straight away. They're like, look, abortion is not an option at this point, but you can talk about induced labor, which I didn't even know was a thing. And so, and his mum and I, we hadn't even started talking about that stuff. He's just doing his job and telling us what our options were. And he said, look, I've booked an appointment for you to at least go talk to a doctor, another doctor, about what your options are. And we were like, oh, okay. So we left the office and started walking to the next appointment because it was about, from memory, half a kilometre away. And by the time we got there, we decided we were going to keep him. So we hadn't even questioned. And, like, I don't know, maybe it's just I can't really speak for anyone else, but it just wasn't an option. There wasn't another option. So by the time we got there, we said, we're actually pretty good. We've kind of talked through it and we've figured it out, and we're all good. Now, I suppose the little bit of detail that's added to this is that her and I were actually separated at the time. That's why it was a little bit of a surprise. It was because, we were separated, but we were still sort of hanging out and stuff. And so it was just very much, and if we can speak frankly, she was still getting her period too. She was taking medication at the time that sort of interfered with her cycle and stuff. So she wasn't showing. So she actually had no idea. So when she did a pregnancy test, and then she called me, and I happened to be in the middle of half a bottle of Johnny Walker, listening to Tool with my friends. In my mind, when she called me, she said, "Hey, I'm pregnant. I'm going to book an appointment with a doctor." I'm like, "Oh, don't worry. It won't be positive. It'll just be like a false positive. We're all good." And I went back to getting on it with my friends, because I was 19 at the time. And honestly, ignorantly thought that it would not be a real thing. And then she came past my house the next day, and we walked on to the doctor's, and I finished that bottle of Johnny Walker, so I was in quite a state the next morning. And so when I saw him on the screen in that state, it was quite a thing. I was quite surprised. But I was still reasonable enough to, within that walk from the first doctor to the second, for us to be able to have a conversation about how we are separated now, but what if we got back together, did the rest of the pregnancy as a couple, and moved in together immediately, just to sort of help each other through it. And then once we're established as parents, we'll sort of weigh it up then. And then, that lasted till he was about 4 months old. And that was when we sort of both felt pretty strong as independent parents. Like I could handle having him on my own for hours, if not nights on end, and feel confident that I was going to keep him alive, And so, we separated when Ashton was 4 months old, and we've just shared him ever since, really.
That is incredibly mature for 19.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, I suppose so. I don't really know. It's kind of like I say, everyone's got their own answer to that question, and that was my answer, or
Nice.
our answer, I should say.
So what happened to the Tool tribute band when Ashton was born? What happened with that? Did you keep going?
The Tool tribute band was kind of dissolving anyway, because I was in a prog band where at that point I was writing more original music, and so my interests had sort of moved into that space. All the skills that I had acquired as a drummer and then doing the Tool tribute and all my influences had resulted in this other fully creative instrumental prog band where there were no rules, man, like that sort of thing. And that was the band that it really impacted, because I had to sit the boys down and tell them, and they were like, "Okay, all right, cool. We can, we can deal with this." Like I say, we had goals to take on the world as an instrumental prog band, which those two things do not seem to collide well. And what's super interesting is sort of like over the next few years, I lived with those guys on and off in various capacities, as you do when you're flatting and stuff. And they all became surrogate dads. Like, it's so funny having done this 3 times now, and the second 2 times with my wife. The first time was the easiest because I was so ignorant, and I was so proud of nothing being a problem. I was so like, because Ashton would sleep in a porta cot at the end of my bed for half of the week, and then he'd spend the other half with his mum, and I'm flatting with musicians, and they all are like, "Okay, there's a kid in the house now, cool, no smoking weed, okay, cool, no cigarettes on the property. If I needed to do something and he needed to be fed, cool, one of the boys is now feeding him in the high chair." And this was all, it just became normal stuff. And back then, being ignorant as well, I just kind of, I never took it for granted in the sense that I didn't appreciate it, but I just never thought that there was like another reality that I could be living in with it. Of course, everyone's going to step up. Why wouldn't they, But looking back on it, it's pretty amazing how accommodating my friends and my band were and whatnot. And, we can get into it, but like once he got to 2 years old, I sort of was at a crossroads because the boys wanted to move to Australia and I had to make some pretty hard decisions then, and it was all to do with him. So, and that's kind of been this common occurrence over the last 20 years in various shapes and forms about, the juggle of parenting and what comes with that up against the opportunities and the scale of that. So, and it used to be very hard to navigate, even though I'd always sort of ultimately make the right decision emotionally. I was a wreck, because I did turn down some pretty big opportunities early on because I felt I just personally emotionally couldn't handle the other side of it, even though the opportunity would have been great. I'm just a little bit too sensitive, and I know my responsibilities,
So I know we're fast forwarding now, but we will come back. But I wondered if you could tell us about the gig with Natasha Bedingfield, how that came about and what you've been up to.
Yeah, cool. So, about 12 months ago, I got an email, CC'd into an email. Do you guys know an artist named Kimbra? Female artist named Kimbra? She's a Kiwi and she's done pretty well, but she's based in the US now. And I've known her for 20 years, like around the same time that I was in that prog band. Coincidentally, she was the one girl that used to come to our gigs just as a fan. She was a few years younger. She used to come to our all ages shows. And long story short is the prog band dissolved in Melbourne when I finally made it there, and we all became her backing band. And so I've just had a relationship with her, a friendship with her for 20 years now, or close to. And I just got this random email from her saying, "Hey, Natasha, this is Stan. He'll look after you. I'll leave you guys to it." It was literally that. I don't even think it had a heading because that's very much Kimbra. And I looked at the name fully, and it was Natasha Bedingfield. And obviously I know that name. So she's half Kiwi. Well, she is Kiwi, but she was born in the UK. Both her parents are from New Zealand. I know I had met her brother Daniel maybe a year or two prior, completely unrelated, when I was playing at South by Southwest. He came up to the New Zealand. They did this gig where it's like all New Zealand artists for the day. And he came up and we had a chat afterwards because he really enjoyed my playing. And then, yeah, I got this email and Natasha just popped up a day or two later just saying, "Hey, I've got a couple of shows in Australia and New Zealand at Christmas and New Year's, and I'm looking for a local drummer. Kimbra has recommended you. Would you be interested?" And I immediately said yes, because I just love playing pop. So I didn't need to know the details. I didn't need to know what the pay was or anything like that, because I knew the experience itself was going to be amazing. And, like, who would say no to that? And so I said to her, "Just give me one of your live sets and I'll just have a listen to it. And then we'll meet up in Melbourne and then we'll jump on stage." And she seemed a little bit like, "Are you sure? Like, that's all you need?" And I was like, "Yeah, yep. Just give me, as long as it's the active working versions of how your songs currently are. I won't listen to your studio songs. Just give me your live set. And even if you can have it roughly as to how we're going to play it in terms of sequence, because I listen to everything as a body of work, especially when time is sort of a little bit stripped." And yeah, I just listened to it on and off while I was running. And at the same time, I got the Primus audition. And the only reason I bring that up is because I was so excited about Natasha, and then the Primus thing popped up, and I knew that was happening in January, and it was still only November at this point. And it started to sort of overwhelm and overshadow the Natasha thing. And I actually just had to grab the Primus thing and just go, "Look, you can just stay there until January, because A, I'm super excited about this, and B, she deserves my full attention leading up to it, and then the shows themselves." So I parked the Primus thing and just did my due diligence, learnt the set, and met her in Melbourne. And we met at a rehearsal space with her guitarist, Rod, who's an amazing guy. He's sort of a LA gun. He's done work with Beyonce, Rihanna. He's played with them live, played on Cowboy Carter. Like, he's a beast. And really connected with them personally. And then we just got on stage and we ran through every song once, and she was like, "Oh man, we're fine." And we were, because it's pop, and unless you are making the music about yourself, it's pretty easy to sort of get into the pocket of pop and enjoy it, listening to the vocals and knowing where you can move around or color around the vocals, And I've played for a lot of pop artists over the years, so I really enjoy that balance between creativity and sort of rigidness of the two, the balance of the two. And we're only together for like 4 or 5 days between Australia and New Zealand, but I'm doing some drum clinics that start next week, and I'm talking about this because one thing that I noticed over those 4 or 5 days is I said to my wife before I left, I said, "I'm going to be the best session player she's ever used live." I just knew that I was going to go on with that attitude, and I just listened, and I didn't overwhelm conversation if it wasn't necessary. I listened to what they were saying about other musicians they've worked with. If I was going for a coffee, I'd text and say, "Hey, do you guys want a coffee?" And all the things that really, really pay off, all the soft skills. I just sort of am at a point now where I'm quite dialed in with those. I teach them, I talk about them a lot, and I just know how valuable they are. And and then we had a couple of really amazing shows in New Zealand, Australia, but we also just had a blast off stage as well. It was like a real tight window, but quite intense and concentrated. And then we finished the shows, and it was all hugs at the airport and stuff. And they left back to the US, and I kind of left it at that. And then I had 2 weeks until the Primus audition, so sort of went into the mindset that I needed for that. And to sort of fast forward a little bit to the tour that I've just done with her, she came back to me a few months later and said, "Hey, would you be available for a US tour? Would love to, take you around the US." And I said yes initially. And then her lawyers came back and said that logistically, with the visas and with Trump in at the moment, and just how hard it is at the moment, it's a hard sell because she's a resident of the US. She's married to a guy from the US. And so being a resident, it's really hard for them to justify why they would need to bring in a drummer from New Zealand as opposed to, using someone locally as a resident. If she wasn't a resident, they wouldn't care. But so that fell through. But then I get an email maybe a week or two later asking if I was available for a 7-week tour of Europe, and that was a big one, which I had to talk to my wife about. And my son was not quite 2 yet, so he's over those real hard sort of first 18 months, but it's still pretty damn hard, And so that's how the Natasha thing happened, and then that's how the sort of the 7-week stint with her happened as well.
I'm glad that you linked into that, because I wanted to ask you about that next. So a 7-week tour takes a lot of prep. I wondered how you deal with that with your family. So was there anything that you did specifically to help your kids prepare them for that, for you being away?
So you mean preparing them for just me not being around, and just, well, with Max, we couldn't. He's just too young to understand it. And my daughter, Audrey, she's completely fine. She's 13, and she's a very mature 13-year-old. Classic, she's 13 going on 20, but she's also just really level-headed. She understands creatively what my wife and I both do. My wife's a freelance photographer. She was just photographing avocado mayonnaise for a supermarket brand yesterday in our garage while I was looking after Max. And she knows, what I do for a living, and also how driven I am by it, and we are as a family. And also she knows who Natasha Bedingfield is. And so that's pretty cool, like telling her that I'm playing Unwritten when all of her friends have that song on their playlist is, she doesn't really talk to her friends about what I do unless it's something like really worth talking about. And she had a few like sort of cheeky grins on her face when she found out that I was doing this. And in terms of my wife and I talking about it, I should say my son's at university in Wellington now, so he's fully baked. We can't do much more with him at this point. So with Jess and I actually was the one that initially was unsure. She said yes before I did, which I was like, why do you want me out of the house so quick? But she also knows how hard that I've worked for this, man. Like I've actually said no to plenty of opportunities similar to this in the past, because A, I probably wasn't emotionally ready, and B, Audrey at this age was much different to my son now at this age. So I would go to the airport in Australia just working with local artists and do like weekends here and there, or a week over in Canada or whatever, and she would be crying at the airport. And honestly, like, I can't tell you anything more painful than that, to the point where I stopped touring. I actually left a couple of projects that were just on the cusp of like going big time, and they went on to go big time. Sort of 3 projects in particular come to mind, but it was just too hard. And that's when I sort of went into the coffee side of things a little bit more and set up a business where financially it kept me at home, and I just put all my time into practice, which kind of helped me in the long run anyway, which is kind of weird. My path was never sort of fully considered as to where I'm at now, but I wouldn't be where I am now had I not had all those little things happen that kept me at home. I would get up at 3 or 4 in the morning and do 3 or 4 hours of practice before the workday would start, or the family got up, and all of that condensed practice time in my 20s and early 30s, which most people don't really get because life's kicked in, has served me to no end now,
And then coming back off that tour, how did you deal with suddenly, I mean, maybe you experienced postal blues, and then kind of suddenly being back in family life with zero buffer?
I was really curious about that. Not worried about it, but curious, because the tour was so amazing. And but it's quite interesting. 7 weeks is a long time. So the honeymoon period wore off at about week 3, week 4. And it's kind of weird to say that with what I was doing, but it turned into a job, not in that I wasn't enjoying it, but you're in the machine now, And that's kind of the part of the tour that I was looking forward to, because I'd never done 7 weeks with an artist before. And if I had spoken to you a year ago and said a bucket list thing I still had, I would have said long-term touring with a major artist. But I wouldn't have even known if that was a thing these days, because even big artists have big breaks, So I was curious to see how well I toured, for one. Can I tour? Like, I'm a creature of habit, and I've sort of, I steer my own ship. I come to my studio, life is on my terms. I'm very much a lone wolf. I just kind of do my own thing. And I was curious as to how the uprooting of that was going to affect me. That part of it was fine. Being away from the family was fine, because Audrey and Max weren't emotionally torn by it. Audrey's mature enough to handle it. She's messaging me, watching my Instagram stories and stuff. And Max was just too young to really understand it. He would get on video sometimes and he's just like, oh, that's kind of weird. Dad's there now, And then after the honeymoon period wore off, I was just looking forward to getting home. And so coming back from the 7 weeks was not hard at all. It was actually harder getting back on the plane a week and a half later to go play in front of 100,000 people in Brazil with Natasha for a one-off show, because I really didn't want to get back on a long haul flight. And even given what that was, we were at a festival, we were playing, prior to Mariah Carey, and it was just like insane by all metrics, but I just didn't want to get back on the plane. And I would say I had a much harder time coming back from the Primus audition. And there's a lot of nuance to that statement. It's probably not what you think, but emotionally, I had a massive come down from that. And I know what I did wrong in terms of the prep. But this tour, I did the work. I did a fucking good job. I was easy to deal. Like, I only cracked twice where I sort of snapped at a server at a restaurant because they were annoying me. And I also snapped at a guy at like 2 a.m. at a hotel in Manchester because we were checking in late, because we had some delays, and he was just standing there not saying or doing anything, and we were well past that point. And me snapping is going, "Chief." And so it became this joke on the rest of the tour that, like, when you're pissed off, you say "Chief." And that's what I was curious about. Like, can I, like, I'm a lone wolf, so the social aspect of the tour was probably the hardest thing. Lobby call in the morning, and then you're pretty much with everyone until the end of the gig, unless you get an hour or two reprieve to go back to the hotel, which I would always take. But I'm happy to put on my headphones and go for a 5K walk to a cafe to get to the lay of the land on my own. But other people aren't like that. Other people like to be around people, and so having to adjust to that in real time and catching myself out was really interesting. And I got there eventually, but like, I'd call my wife and I'd be like, "Fuck, they want to do dinner again?" And then she's like, "Oh yeah, that sounds horrible." And I was like, "Oh yeah, true." I had to kind of, and then once I accepted it, it only took a day or two of like that sort of mindset to kind of switch it out and go, "Man, these people just really like hanging out, and I do too. And what an amazing thing to be able to do." So there was some adjusting, but all for the better. And when I came back, I was just stoked to be home.
Your work ethic is incredible. You're up at what, 4:30 in the morning. What is the effect then when it's bedtime for the kids? And I mean, it's different now because you've just got one little one. But now or in the past, have you ever regretted getting up that early? Because is your resilience gone by bedtime, or have you always just,
I would say my resilience is like pretty low for the last 3 hours of the day in any state. I think what people don't realize is that if you want to have great things happen, and if you want to, like, I've got some pretty big goals in terms of where I want to be in 10 years time. I'm always thinking ahead. If you're not willing to kind of rise above sleep sometimes, lack of sleep and all those things, then none of those things will happen. And like I opened this up with, I'm very obsessed with that. And so prioritizing getting better on the instrument is not hard for me, and I will actually shape my life around that, even at the expense of sleep sometimes. And whenever I've talked about that stuff online, the sleep thing gets pushed back quite a lot. But honestly, like I say, if you want to move forward, if you want to, live a life on your terms by my standards of what that means, and take the risk of running your own business, as you know, as an entrepreneur, like, it's going to require a little bit more than just feeling tired and not doing it. And so I built in a mechanism pretty early on where it doesn't get the better of me. And look, I will eventually need to kind of catch up. I mean, like I say, Max woke up 3 times a night, probably worse than the other 2 kids combined. And he's incredibly loud. He came out of the womb. We call him a little pterodactyl, just naturally quite loud. And so if I didn't get up at 3 or 4 in the morning and do my admin for my mastermind stuff, or shoot to the studio for 3 hours and get some practice in, then I wouldn't be hitting the things that I need to hit to get to the place that I'm at now. So what I've realized over time is that not everyone's like me. And I know that because I initially kind of thought that everyone could tap into that. I just kind of figured that if you care about what, like the drums, then everyone should have a reservoir, but they don't, and that's completely fine. And everyone's got their own levels of how they approach stuff, and some agree with my approach and some don't. It's kind of not really right or wrong. It's just what works for me,
Where you just started talking a little bit about Mastermind. Tell us a bit more about that.
So Mastermind was like an idea that I came up with about 2 years ago on a run. a lot of my ideas, good and bad, come when I'm doing exercise. And the thing is that over the last sort of 10 or 15 years on social media, I've been sharing bits and pieces about how I sort of approach my day to day. Like I used to do shots of the practice pad at 4 a.m. back in Melbourne at my coffee roastery. And people used to just like really react to that, good and bad. And it was just kind of more, I would always kind of, I was always surprised initially that was like that people would react to that stuff, whether good or bad. It's hard to sort of summarize, but I was doing what you now class as personal development, but I didn't realize. And I only know that because I've since gone really deep into that world. I've read 1,000 books on it, because once I discovered that had a category, I was like, oh shit, that's a home for all my weird ideas about getting up early and scheduling and prioritizing and time blocking. And okay, so I've got a full schedule from 7:30 in the morning till 7 p.m. Oh, I know what, I'll just get up at 3. Like these sort of ideas. And reading every morning upon waking, the things that I prioritize, getting off my screen, not having my phone in my room, because how do you set up a business when you're getting bogged down by all those things, So having to set up some pretty strict rules. And so, yeah, I started sharing this stuff online, but never tied it into my drumming. But then over the time as an educator, I would more and more of it bled in, because it's my foundation. It's like, if you work on all your soft skills and all these areas outside of your drumming, then your drumming is going to get better, because this should not be hard to make time for, because this is your love. So if you are finding it hard to make time for it, that's probably not the problem. There's some other areas that we need to look at. So get up a little bit earlier, go for a walk, listen to some really amazing, inspiring and positive audio, put your phone down at certain times. Cliche stuff said now, but and I expect this stuff off my students, because if they're going to take my time, they need to make the substantial gains that justify that relationship, And a lot of the stuff that I teach is slow burn long term. It's not 16-note licks. It's like you're going to have to do open and close for at least 30 minutes a day for about a month before we can probably move forward, And that's me shutting down lessons because they might want to come back in a week's time. And I'm like, we're not ready yet, because where I want to go and the way the path works is that you just need to do a bit more work. And they're also showing their commitment to that as well. And so anyway, I couldn't quite figure out, like when I did Drumeo, I gave a lot of intellectual property over to the courses that I filmed for Drumeo, right? And once I did Drumeo, I never talked about it again online, because I never wanted to rest on my laurels of that being the biggest thing that I've ever done. So I literally never posted about it again after I did it, on the thing that I was like, this is just an amazing experience that I'm grateful for having, but I've got to keep moving, right? It was not to say that I didn't, that I was ignoring it. It's just that I was not going to lean on it, right? And I gave them, I filmed a couple of courses for them, and I always intended on doing my own courses, but my apprehension was, it was like, in and amongst the world of education, especially with drum courses, this day and age especially, but back then it was like, the curriculum's not enough. Like I have my own ways of doing things, but I didn't want to throw my hat in the ring, because I just didn't feel that the curriculum itself was substantial enough to justify throwing my hat in the ring. There could be a little bit of self-doubt in there and stuff as well, but ultimately I just didn't feel that it was unique enough to justify it. And then one day I was going for a run, and I just saw a Mastermind Drummer developing the person and the player. And I was like, oh shit, that's what I do anyway. And so I got home and I sent I put a message up on my Instagram just saying, if you're interested in me writing weekly newsletters about how to level up on and off the kit, then give me your email and I'll put you in my database and we'll go from there. I'm going to drop a course in a month's time, but I want to start here. And so I started writing 2,000 words every week from January the 1st, 2 years ago. And it was really just about my ideas, good and bad, about being a professional. I'm pretty hard and fast on my ideas with that sort of stuff, and what it takes to be a professional, and what you're willing to do and where you're willing to go to get yourself to a certain level. There's many elements to being a professional drummer. You need the skill set, but you need to be personable. You need to have great communication skills. You need to be good with visibility, so what they're seeing. And I started identifying all these areas. So health, well-being, relationships, like all these things come into what I teach in my 30-day programs. And so, yeah, I just suddenly saw literally the ecosystem of what my education. So like I've got things that I consider turning points in my playing, right? So the first one was when I really dialed in my double stroke, just because that one has such an impact on all of your drumming. Fills, flow, chops, grooves, if you've got strong world-class doubles, that's just, it has an exponential impact on your playing, right? And then the next thing for me was my dynamic work. So I got really obsessed with the strokes, came up with some of my own ideas in that journey. And when I did 3 or 4 months of like strict daily intentional dynamic stroke work with free and controlled strokes, my playing went like that, even though it's a really boring, arduous task. And I was like, okay, that was a massive turning point. When it came to my flow and facility, when I started working on odd number groupings and the relationship between linear and non-linear, simplifying my approach so I don't think about drumming in terms of patterns and like rudiments and things like that. I kind of figure that you're either doing a single, a double, linear, non-linear, or you've got a rest. Now there's a dynamic spectrum to that, but when I simplified the way that I was thinking about drumming, my ideas just sort of came a lot more naturally. And so it's another turning point in my playing was that. And so I knew what my curriculum points were. And then I just basically coincided all of these ideas with books that I really value that changed my life, with an expectation on physical and mental health. So, like with health, it's like internal and external. So internal being whole foods and whatnot, external just being a little bit of cardio and a little bit of body weight training. That's what I teach. It's like I've done a bit of everything now, and I've just sort of come back to the basics where a few push-ups and bodyweight squats and dips just on the chair and then going for a run or a walk in some people's cases is enough. But it's a requirement as a drummer, because whether you're jazz or metal, you're an athlete, whether you realize it or not. Even if you're the most low dynamic player, you're still sitting in a very, very tough position at the hinge of your hips. And we all know, like, we get up, especially at our age, it's like, oh man, when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, and so I just suddenly felt that I had a genuine approach to the way I wanted to educate that meant a lot to me. It wasn't just a cash grab. It was like, with every course that I sell, each course has a different 2 set of books. I give a time blocking template, teach people how to time block by the half hour. And that was because that's what I used to do when I was a young parent. I had 3 bands on the go. I was running my espresso bar and all these things going on. I had to look for the windows. And so I just got into a habit of going into my notes and going, okay, so tomorrow is this, 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 and this. Okay, I've got a half hour block there. I can probably pull the pad out then. But if I get up 2 hours earlier, I can do that then. Where is my run going to fit in? Oh, I know, I can do that at 9:30 once the kids are down. And it was just this kind of like, every day was a puzzle, but it made sense to me. And it meant that I was ticking all my personal requirements off daily for the things that make me feel like I'm moving forward in life and not just sitting. Because there's nothing more, nothing puts me in a chokehold faster than the idea of being comfortable, but not in like a weird way, more just in like a, I don't know. I see the player that I want to be at 55. I'm 41 now, and I just know the work that I've got to do to get there. People talk about balance a lot, and I just reckon it's a fallacy. It's like, if you want to if you want to do well in business, become a great player, be an amazing parent, and all these things, there's no balance about it at all, because for me to do that, I have to get up at times that most people aren't willing to, and sometimes go to bed a little bit later too, to reconcile the invoices,
Can I jump in?
Please, because I've had a lot of coffee.
So with your Mastermind Drummer, it sounds like you've done everything yourself, like the website, you're sending out a weekly email, you've set up the courses, and you've figured out all of the tech involved in doing that. Have you ever thought about delegating to save your time?
Yeah, I just can't afford it. That's just the nature of the beast. It's like, I am the primary earner, and we bought our first house. Like, so when we had Max, we bought our first house, and I decided to start a new business.
Oh, sheesh.
I couldn't think of a worse, like, looking back on it, I don't know what the hell I was thinking, because I'm not joking that, like, so I've been a business owner in some capacity through coffee and drumming since my early 20s. And that tension that comes with that has never subsided. And I would say the last 2 years in particular, because I would say that I've chosen an even harder industry to do it in the way that I like to do it. Like, it'll be the night before the mortgage payment, and I'm like, well, fuck, we'll see what happens. And I'll come up with an idea, and I will do something within those last 12 hours. And like Jess and I have no personal debt, no credit cards, no loans. We got rid of all that years ago when I sold my coffee roastery. We sort of got all our ducks in a row there, moved back to New Zealand with a house deposit. And I then upskilled in a few areas that you just mentioned, knowing that I was going to need those things. Even recording, I'd never touched mics until like 2 or 3 years ago. Done a lot of recording in studios, but just went in as the player. I should have been like talking and listening and taking, but yeah. So anyway, upskilled in a few areas and whatnot. And then we bought our house, and man, it's been chaos. And so I'd love to delegate, but it's not a matter of control. It's just that I'm not in a position to do that. We're not doing badly, but we're not in a position to pay a wage or all those things. I'm sure there's like 5 versions of this, but no, I actually do like learning these things as well, because if anything was to go wrong or if someone was to leave or anything like that, it's like I'm just left with a problem. So there is maybe an element of control.
Can you tell us about internet trolls, and if you have them, how do you deal with them?
Yeah, I suppose maybe defining troll might be a little bit easier to start with. I definitely have had a lot of haters. Not troll. I mean, I think of trolls as people that are like, oh no, I've definitely had some trolls as well. Trolls seem like they're more agenda driven, whereas like I've just had genuine people that hate what I say, hate what I stand for, and absolutely hate my playing. And they've definitely let me know about it. And that started back in the Drumeo days, because it was the first time I was exposed to an audience that wasn't my own. And so I already had my audience and a substantial one, but they were all there because they enjoyed it. And then when I went on Drumeo, it was the first time that I experienced people talking about me in such a, like, because I wasn't their flavor or whatever, which is totally fine. But that initially was actually quite hard to deal with. And I remember around that time, my son was socially having some problems. Just a young, I think he was sort of maybe around 10 or 11, but he was struggling with a couple of kids at school. Oh, no, he must have been older, maybe like 13, 14. It was around the same time that I did Drumeo. And I said to him, I was like, man, you know that not everyone needs to like you. That's completely fine. I said, do you like everyone that you meet? And he said no. And I was like, exactly. Like, it's your sovereign right to like gel with the personality or not. I said, you don't need to be an asshole, but don't expect everyone to like you. Just, like that's... And then I was saying it and I was like, oh, not everyone needs to like my playing. That's totally okay. Why would a country drummer, a traditional country blues drummer, like me as a player? Like tight snare that's been choked to death. A lot of modern aspects that those guys don't like, And once I got to that place with it, that helped a lot. I've considered deleting my Instagram, and I've had my finger over the deletion button multiple times in my journey. Probably more so when I was in the coffee world, because I didn't feel like I had so much weighing on it. But now I'm at a place where, I don't know, social media is a weird one. I'll tell you what, I don't fear saying what I think, right? So I'm happy to deal with what will come with that. I would say that it often shoots me in the foot saying what I think. Like, I've been up at like 180,000 people and now I'm at 150. That's a pretty clear indicator that the more that you have an opinion or a genuine thought, the more you're risking losing a general audience, right? And as I get older, I care about that less and less, which is really empowering. I feel really, I don't really care. It's kind of weird, but I don't want to burn the bridge too, as my wife would call it. She's like, you're building it. Why are you burning it as you take each step? Even with some of the things that I have opinions on. But the problem is that I care an awful lot about this instrument, and it's there's no, like, man wasn't created, or man and woman wasn't created, and there was drums sitting right beside them. This is a completely subjective thing, and there are no rules. And whenever there's a dogma attached to this, so like when educators will say certain things like the beater has to be off the head and things like that, I just sort of pull back. And so, like, I have my beliefs and I'm happy to share them, and people can give or take, and I'm at a good place with the hate that comes with being online now, which I've definitely had my fair share.
Yeah, it can be frustrating. I just was ranting at my husband today because I got like an unsolicited message just giving it a thought, and I just thought, oh, fuck you. I didn't even ask you. I didn't even ask for your feedback. Why do you think I fucking care? But then I'm annoyed that I have that energy there, because I shouldn't even give it thought.
I know, because you don't know who they are, where they are, what they are. And if it was in person and it was a 5-year-old, you'd probably entertain them just you know, just like, oh, that's kind of cute.
Yeah.
But you kind of assume that everyone comes in with the weight of like they deserve respect or acknowledgement before you even know who they are.
Yes. Like I should have
Yeah.
been grateful for his message, and I just thought, no, I'm really
I
not.
know. It's weird, eh? Yeah, you getting better with it?
Yes, I've come a long way.
What about you, Gemma?
Oh, I'm not there aren't enough people looking at what I'm doing. It doesn't bother me. Plus I'm too cheesy, but I do I'm not really bothered. It's fine. But Kira has definitely improved with stuff over the years. Like she used to be upset. Now she's like,
Oh man, that's hard.
Yeah, I'm a sensitive person. I've just realised that at 42.
you've only just realized that. I knew that 20 years ago. What are you talking about?
I am as
no.
well, and I've dealt with that in different ways, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. And I mean, I'm at a weird place with everything now, coming off the Natasha thing and having such an amazing year. It's kind of part of what my drum clinic's about, is that I've had the last 12 months have been like, first of all, unpredicted. So joining on with Natasha in those two different capacities, getting the Primus audition, Mastermind sort of like going to a new level, like it had a really good year. And I'm in this weird place with it all now where I don't know if this is the path to where I want to be at 50. Like, I don't know, given all the things that I've had and where I'm at with my career, and for want of a better way to put it, what I can charge myself out for as a live drummer and the reputation that I've built locally and whatnot and the opportunities. I'm not sure that this is the path to where I want to be at 50 with my wife and my family and stuff. So, which is exciting, you know, and because I've done things in other industries, I still find that quite attractive. Not so much coffee, but I'm open to other things. And I don't know what that is, but I know that now that I'm thinking about this, it's the answers will come eventually as long as I keep running, you know.
Do you believe in manifestation?
I do, but only in the sense that there needs to be work that backs it. And I think that often, which I'm sure you agree with, I definitely have manifested a lot of things over the years, but I do a lot of real time, you know, blood, sweat and tears. And so there's a chicken or the egg thing with that. I've read enough psychology books and philosophy books where some more ethereal based and then some more sort of data driven. And I kind of sit in the middle of the two. I use the terminology from the ethereal world, but I understand that it needs a practical edge to get there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. I always, I'm frustrated sometimes with that phrase because some people feel like there's no work involved, you know, just think the thing or whatever. And I just think, no, you have to take inspired action. You have to move.
Yeah, that can be a trap, eh? Especially in the online coaching world, in any industry, whether it's fitness or just, you know, life coaches in general, because some of the stuff that I teach could definitely fall into the categorization of life coach. And I'm conscious of that, so I make sure that things that I talk about and teach are sort of a little bit more feet on the ground, you know. But books that I recommend, that I recommend can kind of vary on that scale.
I now want to know all of the books, but you can tell us later.
Sure.
Can we go back to when you had a coffee business? I'm curious how you even got into that, and then I'm also curious on the transition, ending that and then doing what you're doing now. I know that's a big question.
No, it's quite simple. My grandparents owned a cafe in New Zealand when I was very young, and so I started working there when I was 11. So I was clearing dishes, dropping trays, you know, clearing tables and making an ass of myself, and then complaining to my nana at 11 that she's working me too hard. The 3 hours that I was working on a Sunday was just like, I remember knocking on her door because we lived downstairs in their bottom flat. They had like a 4-level house and we were on the bottom flat for a little while. And I went upstairs to my nana one day and I'm banging on her door and I'm like you're running me ragged, lady. Like, honestly, I was doing 3 hours on Saturday and 3 hours on a Sunday at 11, and I was making, I think, $6.50 an hour or something. And so I was in that world already, but in terms of working in that world, that started around 18, 19. And I think it was just the product of being a creative and working, like, as soon as I touched the sticks, I considered myself a drummer. So at 13, 14. And so I was just doing everything I could to pay to live, but that be the focus. And so you usually move into hospitality, don't you? Because it doesn't involve a degree. And I look back on those years and they did so much for me because the social expectations of being in hospitality are so demanding, and your ability to adapt in those small, fast transactions. And I really see that serving me so much these days, being a little bit older and running things like clinics and masterclasses and talking to the camera and stuff. And but yeah, so in terms of, I started working as a barista when I was 17 or 18. And when I moved to Melbourne, when I was 21, 22, I started working for some guys within a week of being there. And then after 3 years of running one of their sites, it was an espresso bar on the county court forecourt in the Melbourne CBD. So you had the county court, the magistrates court, and the Supreme Court in Melbourne of 5 million people. I was the only coffee cart right there in the center of that. And I ran that for 3 years through so many crazy things. And I went to them after like a few weeks of working there and said, do you mind in between customers if I just do pad work? And they were like, no, that's cool. So you'd often see me with my practice pad in the cart doing rudiments or whatever, or just working my hands in between coffees. And after 3 years of running their site, I said that I wanted to move on because I was done. And they said, well, we don't want to lose you. Do you want to open up an espresso bar? And I'd never considered that. And I was like, that was right at the point when Kimbra was crushing it, where she was about to break through. She had just been offered a 3-month tour of the US with Foster the People. And so I was playing with her locally in Australia and working as a barista. And I was at this point where she had been offered this 3-month tour, and I've been offered that as well. And then also, do you want to set up an espresso bar? And that tour represented everything I'd worked towards as a drummer, a session guy, you know, like I was being asked to go on tour with a major artist through the US with an even bigger band. But at the time, my son, there's a lot of detail here, but my son was living with his mum in New Zealand. And so when my prog band decided to move to Australia, I said no, because my son was too young to leave, right? And then they called me up a few months later and said, we really need you over here. We can't find a drummer. And I said, well, I want to be a proper full-time dad before I do that so that the bond is secure. So I asked his mum if I could take him full-time. And I had only just met Jess then, my wife. And I said, hey, how do you feel about being a full-time parent for 6 months? And then we'll move to Australia. And she's like, okay. And so Ashton moved in with us, and her and I had only known each other a few weeks at that point from memory. Like, we moved in a week after meeting each other, and she was just like stepmom from day one. She's a year younger than me, so she was only like 21 and I was 22 at that point. And then we had him full time for 6 months leading up to the goal of us to move to Melbourne. Once I felt like my bond with him was like really solidified. It was a double-edged sword, because when we finally did move over there, I was so tight with him that it was the most painful thing I've ever done. And then within 3 or 4 months of being in Melbourne, his mum wasn't coping, basically, like she was struggling. And even though I was flying back every few weeks and flying him over and as an unaccompanied minor, even at like 3, which you pay a little bit more, like $40 for them to like take your kid from the gate to gate. It's kind of weird, but an amazing service. That's what I was doing, man. Like, I was like flying back every couple of weeks or flying him over every couple of weeks in the school holiday, or in the whenever there was a gap in his care or whatever. Like, it's all a little bit foggy now, but that's kind of the gist of it. And at the time that I had to open up, the same time that I got offered the tour with Kimbra or open up the espresso bar, Hillary, his mum, was struggling as a full-time parent. She wanted to go back to Polytech and finish off her degree. And I said, okay, I'll talk with Jess. And Jess and I decided that we were ready to take him again. So we took him, and I decided to not go on tour and set up the espresso bar, and we just did the parent thing. And that was a massive fork in the road thing for me, and no regrets, but it was by far, out of all those times, again, when these decisions have popped up, that was the hardest one, because it felt so wrong to be saying no to that opportunity, but I knew it was so right, you know? And so, yeah, and then that was my first business at that point, 23 years old, 22, 23, setting up an espresso bar in the CBD in Melbourne as well, and just leaning into being a parent and running a business and practicing in it, you know, ungodly hours around that. Opportunities still popped up in and amongst that. That's the cool thing, is that like I still was working on my craft, and social media was becoming a thing then. And so I was promoting myself loosely or just sharing my ideas, and I was filling in for artists for a day or two there, you know, like those sort of spot things, and that's kind of always been the case. And it just got more and more until I left the industry at 37.
How did you
It's hard because like I have to kind of fill in the gaps a little bit so it all makes sense. I hope it's not too much.
Absolutely not. Like, I'm so glad you opened up about that because I feel like it's not talked about. And like, how did you even reconcile that feeling? Because I can imagine, it, as you said, it was so difficult. How do you even decide? And then once you made that decision, were you relieved or were you still like second guessing? Like, how long were you in conflict internally?
I never second guessed the decision, but I definitely struggled for a long time. So they went on to like, so the drummer, my friend who I gave the sticks to essentially, he came in. He went on to do Letterman, Jay Leno, uh, like the list goes on, man. Honestly, and at the time, I just had to like not follow anything that they were doing and just be really proud that I was a business owner running my espresso bar and being a dad. And um, it was hard for a really long time because it's still, but the side of me that wanted to attach to that was definitely just the ego side of being a full-time musician. And, you know, but because I'd been working so hard towards it, and then when I finally got offered it, it was like giving away the golden goose in some ways. It was really hard, but no regrets at all. Like I don't have any regrets in my life at all, apart from not going on a honeymoon. That's my only regret. But everything else, it's like I'm very much a believer in. It's this kind of weird relationship between not believing in like fate or destiny, but also knowing that every step taken is the right one because it's the only one. So it's kind of a weird kind of dichotomy between the two. Yeah,
Absolutely.
but it was hard.
Oh,
Wow.
But I did actually end up filling in for them at some point too. So like they needed Stevie, the drummer, once they were up and running, he needed me to jump in for 2 weeks in the US. And like I say, I still was able to dabble in that world, and it got easier over time. But those situations popped up more and more, and I got better at dealing with it.
can you tell us a bit more about the clinics that you've got coming up?
I'm starting a clinic tour next week, and it's 4 cities here in New Zealand, which is pretty much all of them. Christchurch, Wellington, where I live in Tauranga, and up in Auckland. There's one each week with clinics and festivals and stuff, which I've done a few of them now. One thing I noticed really early on with either is that me personally as a spectator, I get lost if there's no narrative. So for example, you know, like I've done festivals where Eric Moore's playing, for example, and Eric's awesome. Like we've been out to dinner and he's a great guy and an amazing player. But like watching that for an hour was really intense for me, right? And I lost interest really quick because it's just not like that for an hour is a big thing, right? And I remember taking note of that going, oh, okay, so that's not the right way for me to do what I do. So for me to like confidently string a clinic or a festival together, a festival performance together is really about having a narrative. The narrative for this one, for example, is I'm playing 5 tracks over about an hour or an hour and a half, give or take, in chronological order of the experiences that I've had over the last 12 months. So the first one is I'm opening up with a Natasha song. The next one is a band that I've played with for 3 years here in New Zealand called Black Comet. And the third song is a Primus song, which I wasn't going to do initially because I thought it was a little bit on the nose, but my friend said, no, I should. I was definitely going to talk about Primus, but I've already moved on from that. So to play a song is kind of a little bit, you know, but he made a good point. So I'm playing a Primus song. Then I'm playing a song that's an extension of my creativity. And then I'm finishing it off with the Natasha song because that's where I finished with the tour. And every song, I have a point going into it and a point coming out of it. So for the first song for Natasha, going into it, I'm talking about how a relationship that I've had for 20 years that I've nurtured and looked after with Kimbra, genuine friendship, is still serving me. You know, like she CC'd me into an email for the biggest opportunity I've ever had in my career. You don't know at any point the person that you're dealing with. And I'm not saying that you need to come at it from an agenda, but just leave the room better than when you entered it and make everyone feel awesome along the way. You know, especially if you're on someone else's dollar. And so because that's always been my approach, it just proves to me time and time again that is the approach. And so, you know, so talking about how you don't know who you're dealing with right now, if or when that could potentially change your life one day. So just make sure that you're always putting your best foot forward and you're doing what you can when you can. Then I'll play the track, and then coming out of it, it's just talking about making sure that when you're working for an artist, you're listening and you're being as present as you possibly can and not becoming a liability, you know. I don't drink, and those days are done and things like that. And so, you know, 10 minutes before lobby call, grabbing coffees for people when you're out and about, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, every song has an in and an out. The second song, it's about how I creatively write to artists, where a song is relatively straightforward, but what keeps me interested. So whether it's the pocket or the hi-hat work and the color that you can offer around that, I'll play that song. And then coming out of it, I talk about how knowing when to leave a project, because the one thing that's the through line throughout my last 28 years is that my creativity and my interest in this instrument takes priority over everything. I'd happily work in a different industry if it meant the things that I was currently doing was compromising my love for just sitting down and working on my craft. That has always taken priority, and once again has proven that that's the right path for me. So I won't play in certain projects. I won't do teaching to a certain level where I feel it's killing my buzz, basically. Which I'm sure you've all dealt with as well. And then, the Primus thing is talking about how I only prepared for 2 weeks leading up to the Primus audition, and my pursuit for creativity and craft got me that opportunity because all the skills that I needed for that moment, technically, I've been working on for years just because I have an interest in the craft. And so the songs that they gave me, some of them I'd heard, some of them I hadn't, were not a problem. Now I offered my own groove and even my own spin to some things, but and then how I prepared for it is quite unique, which I won't bore you with, but it's more just about I'd done the work. So when I got that call, I was ready. And then the back end of it after playing the song is, the type of self-belief and confidence that you need to walk into a room where you're 9 of 6,200 people, you're the only drummer from outside the US that's been asked to come in, you're from the other side of the world, you're auditioning with guys that have been your influences for years as an equal, Thomas Pridgeon, Thomas Lang, Gurjo. It's just like, how do you not feel like an imposter, right? And I just didn't feel like an imposter because I work my ass off for this instrument and I love what I do, and I knew that I deserved to be there at the very least. And also, it was my gig until it wasn't. You could have asked me at any point coming up to that was my gig. And then the second I found out that John Hoffman got it, I was like, he's the right man for the gig. It's like approaching those things like it's not a question in your mind, and maybe that comes into visualization and manifestation and really convincing yourself of that, which I was doing over those 2 weeks quite heavily. Listening to live sets and putting myself in the position of the drummer and things like that. And that's how I prepared for it too. I didn't listen to the studio songs. I only listened to live versions, and the 3 drummers that have played for that band primarily, I would listen to the other drummer's version of that song. So I was kind of round robining all the different approaches so that I never got bogged down by one drummer, especially not that drummer's approach to that song. Yeah, so having the confidence and self-belief, because my belief has always been that, and this might have come from my mum. My mum's always had this blind faith in me that used to be quite annoying when I was young, because I'd tell her about great things that are happening, and she's like, well, yeah, of course, because you're my boy. And I'm like, can we not just sit in the moment for a bit? And then as I've gotten older, I've realized that it really gave me this idea that we should all be super proud of what we can do and not be too worried about what we can't do, because the things we can't do, we have control over that as well. That's just a bit of time in those areas. And so, but back yourself in the things that you can do, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I do feel that people get a little bit confused between confidence and ego. And to be honest, there is a crossover there, because you do need an ego to be confident, but the good part of it, right? And so the Primus thing definitely tapped into that personal self-belief that I have. And then the education portion, I'm just going deep into the concepts, stuff that I talked to you about earlier, the things that were needle movers for me. Then playing a song where I genuinely, the parts that I wrote for that song are an extension of the way that I naturally play if I'm just mucking around on the kit. Quite unorthodox sort of stuff. And then I'm finishing it with the Natasha one, and I'm stringing it back to the start, talking about how those 4 days, she has 3 other drummers that she uses in the US and the UK. And these guys are amazing, man. Troy Miller, who played with Amy Winehouse, Mike Bennett, who plays for a bunch of artists in the US, and her main drummer is a guy called Sterling Laws, he's just played on Machine Gun Kelly's album. He does MDing for Chappelle Roan. Like, this guy's in the scene, right? And she asked me if I wanted to do both those tours, So something that I did in those 4 days justified her in asking me it's an extra expense flying from New Zealand. It's not the easiest way to get a session musician in. And so I'm just going off the data and the feedback that I've got over the last 12 months that you do need to be able to play to get these opportunities, and everyone should have a high standard for their craft, and really respect the journey on their terms. But it's one part of it. And I know that the other parts are what got me over the line. And I know that because I know plenty of amazing drummers who aren't getting hired. and I'm not going to sit there and name names, because we're in the industry, I just hear a lot of this stuff and I see it as well. And some of them make it pretty damn obvious too, because of the way they carry themselves online. But the point is that playing is only one small part of it, and the whole point of the clinic is really to say, dial in these areas as well, and you are guaranteed for success.
Thank you so much for talking with us today. You were exactly the person I needed to listen to today as well. It's worked really well.
Cool.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear. Thank you.
I'm buzzing now. I'm like, right, let's go for a run.
We can't have coffee, Ella. It's too late.
It's 10:30.
Can't go for a run, can't have coffee, I won't sleep.
No.
Oh, funny.
But that was great.
I'm glad.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you so
thank
much. I love it. Everything resonates so hard with the whole mindset stuff and just being prepared. And yeah, it's great. I'm going to listen back to this.
Thanks for listening to the Drummer Mamas podcast. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave us a 5-star rating because it makes us more visible to other listeners. And we really do appreciate any comments or reviews. It makes a difference. Thanks again, and see you next time.